mean, it's interesting. China's expansion has not just been into ISR, right? China opened literal police stations in the United States and called them police stations without the U.S. government's knowledge or approval in order to police the local Chinese populace in the U.S. into providing information. Right? There's some recent news articles over the last couple of years about us stopping this and kicking out some of the folks and trying to arrest some of the Chinese intelligence officers focused on it. But they were trying to manipulate and steal intelligence through these police stations by manipulating the Chinese population in the United States. It's fascinating stuff. So it's, the amount of money they're willing to spend on both the technologies as well as the people is mind-boggling.
So this isn't some sort of covert or clandestine play. Like, we're talking actual overt, out in the open in downtown, Chinatown.
They created an office, right? Yeah. It didn't look like a police station, but it was manned by Chinese military,
like people from the PRC.
Yes, and designed to control, right, and intimidate the Chinese population in New York City to provide intelligence or do what they wanted them to do to accomplish their goals.
So you mentioned New York City. Was there other cities that,
yes.
I imagine San Francisco might be?
I won't remember them all for sure, but there were multiple of them, and New York City was one of them that's had some press coverage on it. There's not been a lot of press coverage, but there's been some on it. So it's Googleable about the Chinese police stations in New York and San Francisco.
I mean, when we think about, some people wonder, is it actually a threat? Like, is Russia or China actually a threat? And I think actually how you see Russia or China as a threat is also sometimes divided along political lines. People more liberal leaning tend to identify Russia primarily as the threat, and people that are more on conservative lines tend to focus on China. The reality is, I think anybody will tell you, is they're both threats.
Well, they're both
in different
expansionists.
ways. Yeah.
And they both hold some level of contempt for who we are as a nation and a culture. So I think they're threats because they choose to be.
Yep.
I don't believe that we've set them up as threats that we now have to say, like, if they stayed contained to where they were, I think we'd largely say, okay, no harm, no foul.
Well, I think in China's case, I think everybody would be very happy to just have them as a robust trade partner. I mean, they're such a huge economic powerhouse at this point. I mean, life would be easier, right, if we didn't have a contentious relationship with them in particular.
Sure, but even then, if you think about the amount of control they could potentially wield over our economy by being a trade partner, and then add to that their expansionism across Southern Africa, Central and Southern Africa, and into South America in order to control the mineral trades, in order to control ports, et cetera. You go, okay, wait, is there a different end game here, right? Because you can strangle somebody with your hands, or you can strangle them, with their wallet. And I think, China is setting itself up in order to strangle us more with their wallet than with, physical proximity.
Yeah, that makes sense. But, and people rightly point out, like, well, China's military isn't going to be able to come. Well, they probably are aware of that, and probably don't. They're probably not as concerned with the idea that they don't have as many or as advanced of aircraft carriers as us.
But China builds every commercial shipping vessel in order that to a standard that would immediately allow it to be converted to a military vessel.
That's interesting.
They will not build a commercial vessel that does not also have the potential to serve a military use. That's
very interesting.
So we obviously do not do that, right? We don't build container ships that could also then immediately be converted to a military use. China's very specific in how they approach that. So I think how you count what's the Chinese Navy matters.
They're strong in a lot of different ways, but the fact that they would be so bold as to come into the United States and be running offices out of our major metropolitan areas.
It's very bold.
I almost would say that says more about us than them.
Right.
That would be happening.
Well, the other interesting thing, if you look at what they've done in Africa, for instance, or across other parts of East Asia, I think it's called the BRI initiative, the Belt and Road Initiative, something like that. But, they have built ports or loaned money to governments to build ports and airports, and then built into the terms of these loans that if the governments are unable to pay them back, then they can take over these enterprises. And as it turns out, rarely are they able to pay them back. And quite often, China is able to take them over and then run these Chinese-owned and administered, shipping ports and airports in places that are nowhere near China.
Mm-hmm.
And you think about, okay, so what other capabilities does that provide them?
I remember very distinctly flying into Kabul in late 2017 or early 2018. And, there's not a lot of people on a flight into Kabul at that time that aren't clearly, military contractors or whatever. Half the flight was the sort of 5'11" looking, there's some sort of a contractor for the U.S. government or NATO or something like
Chinese.
That. The other half were Chinese. Mm-hmm. And that was I immediately started looking into that and was like, oh, they're very interested in the lithium mines in Afghanistan.
Yes.
And these other places, to the point where, again, it's just such an overt indication of where a country's head is at is, wow, this flight into an active war zone was not a safe place, not at that time, and here half the flight coming out, a big like Emirates, like A380, like half the flight is Chinese people. Or
and chaos
I should
is
say,
opportunity.
hey, did I check their passports? No. I should say people that looked Asian, that were of Asian descent.
We are making some assumptions here, and I want to be really careful. We are not saying that Chinese in the United States, U.S. citizens of Chinese origin, or anything to be concerned about. We're talking about Chinese operatives from the PRC who are focused on executing Chinese goals. Chinese government
specifically,
goals.
I think about that of like if the PRC is coming over here and setting up these stations in downtown Chinatown, I think these are American citizens that they're oppressing.
Yes, or green card holders, or folks aspiring to be.
Yeah, I mean that's a serious problem, and anybody in America should have a real problem with that a foreign entity is coming in and making life hard on American citizens or American, like you said, permanent residents, anything like that. That's a real problem, and I
mean, our Constitution says if they're here, they're under our constitutional protection. So even if it's somebody who's here, who's came into the country illegally, is trying to figure out a path towards legal citizenship at some point, they're still entitled to our protections, and they still should be entitled to protection against threat from their own government here.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, exactly that. And it's one of the things that makes us unique.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you wholly. Back to Kabul in 2017, I said in chaos, there's opportunity. I do think that they look at that in ways different than we have. Again, they play a much longer game than we do.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned a second ago, it's not so much about the ISR capabilities or satellites, but there's CCTV everywhere. There's a camera. What would be the most high-tech spy camera in the world is now in everybody's pocket as their mobile device, right? When we look at that, and also the proliferation of real-time watch lists and the instant spreading of information about somebody, how do you adapt things like surveillance detection routes or communication covers, things like that when your face and phone exhaust is so discoverable?